Hey everyone, it's Austin Sin making his long-awaited comeback. um, just gonna preface with this. I'm gonna try to do these sort of coverages after events whenever I can, just to kind of fill up the void that is my blueprints and the fact that it's almost been a year since I made the I think Whitaker one, but I do have a yawn one, pure yawn. I have a pure yawn one in the works. Not sure how long it's going to take because I also had a Corey one in the works and then a McGregor one in the works and then possibly a Song Yadong one too. But today I'm covering 296 and I'm just going to be covering the main card. I watched the prelims. I didn't really get a whole lot out of the prelims. Minifield and, what was that? Jacoby. Those two had a fun fight. Rosa and, God, what is that other lady's name? I'm clicking on preliminary cards so you can see Rosa and Aldana. I remember Aldana is the bigger name, but I forgot her. Um, that one was fun. That one was a lot of like jab cross by Aldana, and then Rosa would just jab low kick, and it was just that the entire fight, which fun. But I would like to see them kind of if you get hit with like jab inside low kick 30 times in a row at the in the UFC, it's one of the highest levels of women's MMA. You would want to see someone make some adaptations to deal with it that isn't like Aldana has a skill set, and the thing she did well is come out more aggressive to stop Rosa from being able to do it as much. But I would have liked to see a little bit more adjustments just for her to defend it more, just to see that she's actually knowing what she's dealing with instead of just trying to overwhelm Rosa. But she pulled it out, and okay, enough of the prelims. Just overall prelims, Lipsky won, Garbrandt won in a fight that he really should have won, but if you watch it, it was worrying. Yeah, so main card. I'm gonna start at the top and then move down, just so at least three. I'm trying to get through this a little quick, just because I have to edit through it and I have work in the morning, so very fun. That's also been part of the um, upload schedule problems that I work full time now, so I've been a little busy. I like work full time and then trade afterwards. A little bit of a time crunch to do these and a motivation crunch, but starting at the top, Covington and Edwards, decent fight. Most of these fights I won't say were fantastic, but I had fun the whole time. And most of what I saw of people who did not have fun watching the fights are a lot of people who just dislike grappling, which is fair. If you don't like grappling, that's understandable. Whenever a grappling sequence is happening that I don't think is going anywhere, I will like look away unless I'm interested in the fight. So a lot of the grappling sequences with like Rachmanov and Wonderboy, I did not watch a whole lot of the grappling because it was boring to me, which that's fair for me. I'm just some dude on YouTube. It's not like I'm not getting paid for this right now. I'm not a professional analyst. I'm allowed to skip. But yeah, Edwards and Covington had a decent fight. It was not very exciting for the most part, but what we did see is Leon Edwards and his skill set being used almost perfectly to completely shut down Colby Covington. We saw very good use of stance switching and ring cutting by Edwards to basically push Covington almost up against the cage the entire fight. That was very I it was very fun to watch him use something like just use ring cutting and the pressure of the counters that Covington had to deal with. That sort of pressure and position stopped most of Covington's game because one, in a situation where one person is one more powerful of a puncher and two longer than you, and also three a counter puncher who wants you to come in so he can counter you, it makes you very less likely to open up. And the big thing with Colby Covington is that he does his best whenever he opens up and he's able to overwhelm the opponent and pressure them. So we saw very quickly Edwards push him back, counter multiple blows, and then get Covington second guessing what he was going to do. So a lot of this was Covington not being comfortable enough to increase his pace, because whenever he would, striking wise, he would get countered pretty well. And then in the grappling, since he was already being backed up, he was shooting off of the back foot or shooting off of boxing exchanges from far out of proper boxing range. So he would throw a strike and then try to shoot, or just shoot from way too far away and with a little bit more of a telegraph, because he would stop backing up or stop moving in a way that gave it away, simply because he was on the back foot. You know, if you're using lateral movements, moving side to side, or you're backing up straight towards the cage, you have a moment of pause before you can go in a straight line for something like a wrestling shot. However, if you're going forward with boxing combinations, you can go like jab, jab, and then shoot while going in a straight line. But if you were going laterally, like to your left or right, you would have to jab and then stop the sideways momentum and then shoot forward into the guy. And that sort of telegraph on a guy like Leon Edwards, where he knows you were going to want to do that at some point, did give it away enough for him to defend almost all. He would either defend the takedown outright by having a good sprawl and trying to get to Covington's back, or he would defend enough to get to the cage and reverse position, or threaten something like a ninja choke to get Covington off of him. And then whenever he does get taken down, outside of that last round, he was able to get up pretty quick. But overall, the fight was a very good showing of how a kickboxing game plan with proper takedown defense and everything can work against that sort of high pressure, high volume output that somebody like Covington can do. Because no one's going into this and no one's watching the fight and going, Covington's gassed. No one's saying he's tired. People were saying he's slow, which he did look a little slow. But he did not look tired at all in the fight. And he was even saying after the fight it was his easiest fight, which is wild because he lost. But, you know, you do you, dog. Overall, it was a very good showing of game plans by Leon Edwards, and a showing of improved, basically, because if you're fighting Covington, you're fighting Usman without the power and a little bit more volume and pressure. Because Usman fights very similar to Covington. Or I guess they, both interchangeably in that sort of sense. They're both mostly boxing centric. Covington kicks a little bit more, and they box into wrestling. And they like to get you up against the cage and pressure you back so that they can use the cage to wrestle and wear you down. And Covington wasn't able to do any of that because of the game planning of Leon Edwards. Moving on, Pantoja, Alexandra Pantoja and Brandon Royval. I really enjoyed this one. This is my favorite fight from the main card, which I feel like is fair because there wasn't a whole lot else. But I really enjoy this one because Royval, I look at someone who is insane cardio, very wild in his offense, but you can tell he's wild in his offense with some of the decisions he makes, but his overall technique on a lot of things is very good. And Pantoja, we look at as someone who has very good power for the division, has a few solid techniques he's very good at, and he is very good at grappling. So we see this 5'10", more so striker in Royval, and then the more well-rounded, shorter guy who in the fight and before the fight has shown less cardio than somebody like Royval. Because the big thing with Royval is his overwhelming offense. However, they had a fight beforehand, and I believe Alexandre did win by submission. So that fear of the takedown and the possibility of him being so good still that he could tap Royval out probably did have some impact on what Royval was willing to do, especially early on. But I feel like later on throughout the fight, he got more willing to go for stuff, especially after he realized, if he gets on me, it's very difficult to stop him. But I can survive there. That's the big thing. If you're the striker in the striker, I'm not saying he's like only a striker, I just want to specify he's just more of a striker than he is a grappler from what I've seen. I haven't watched everything he does, but from all the clips I've seen of him, it's him doing spinning elbows and landing very long shots, like jab, jab, cross, that sort of deal. But overall, we saw that Pantoja is very strong for the division, which if I looked through his fight catalog, I probably would have seen more of. It's just I did not go back and watch everything. But I did really enjoy his fights. Like the fights that I have seen, I really enjoyed his performance here. I thought after the first round, Pantoja had a demeanor change where he seemed to be a lot more tired in his movements, but he was doing all the exact same things, and Royval wasn't doing enough to really counter it. Because we saw early on, the main tactics of Pantoja on the feet is body kicks and then clinch body knee. He has a wonderful collar tie and elbow grip directly into the knees to the body that he was almost trying to fold Royval around his knee with, to the point where Royval would back away to relieve the pressure and try to get out of the clinch, and he would back himself to the cage where Pantoja would then shoot on him. That's how he got the first big takedown and got all the control time in the first round off of that sort of setup, because it was body kick. Royval would go to grab the kick, and whilst he goes to grab it, Pantoja grabs the elbow, collar tie, and knees him in the stomach, pushes him towards the cage, and gets the takedown. Now, I'm oversimplifying it, obviously, for explanation, because there is a lot of stuff that goes on, especially whenever someone's trying to catch your kick in that moment. Like, Pantoja's obviously, like, stomping that leg down, getting that leg out of that grip, and then having to do all the other stuff to control him and follow him and whatnot. But the main premise of a lot of what he was doing was that body kick, because Royval is a tall, lanky southpaw, and, excuse me, Pantoja was a orthodox fighter for most of the fight. He wasn't switching a whole lot, and the times he did switch, like in the fifth round, there's a maybe 30-45 second sequence where he switched to southpaw, got hit about 4 times, and then switched back to missed and got hit about 4 times, and just switched back to orthodox, which is fair. It just wasn't working out. Southpaw wasn't working out against Royval, because Royval's already like the better straight puncher, and then you go into a close stance matchup where his jab's able to land far more easily, and it's a lot harder to kind of deal with his jab because it's way closer to you. However, it was still a good fight. A lot of people had criticisms for Pantoja because of the excitement factor of him on the ground. Some people called him a wet blanket for this, which is crazy to me because he was doing stuff. It's just that some people seem to misunderstand that, they don't understand that you can do stuff whilst not punching the guy. Because that's what was happening, is that Pantoja and Royval, Pantoja would be on top of him in half guard, and Royval would get up on his side and push the knee that he did not have in his half guard. He would push with both arms, get it away, and pummel back to full guard. And Pantoja would then, since his leg was already being pushed down, he would take his hand and push the leg that was coming up back down and then step over it back in half guard. And they were doing that a lot, and Pantoja seemed to be more so trying to use the sequence to tire Royval out, and Royval was just trying to get back to his full guard, because in his full guard he was having a lot more success both landing some offense that meant a little bit more than pitter patter shots and a half guard. He was landing a little bit better, and it's a lot easier to get up from that sort of position. But Pantoja was doing a good job of denying that and then threatening with an arm triangle. He almost got one, and I was very hyped about that. I was going off and on about it. Excuse me. But Pantoja used that sort of sequence, that arm triangle sequence, a lot just to threaten Royval into going back down, flattening his back, and or turning his back the other way so he can get behind Pantoja and go for rear naked chokes or go for back control and land his own shots. There's one moment, because Royval was also, if he was near the cage, he would try to push off of the cage to flip him and Pantoja both over so he can land on top of him. It did not work, but it was doing enough to keep Pantoja more worried along the side of the fence, but it also ended up in situations where he almost ended up flat on his stomach with a body triangle with Pantoja behind him. He almost ended up like that. I was worried for him, but he ended up fighting out of position because, he lost, but Royval's good. He's still a good fighter. But a lot of the complaints about activity and everything is people who don't understand that parts of grappling are slow just because it's grappling. It's not either Royval or Pantoja directly just only wet blanketing. They're trying to do stuff, but they're also having the stuff they're doing get stopped by the other guy. So they're in stalemate situations and they're trying to break the stalemate and then they get put into a stalemate situation. You can argue it's not the most fun thing to watch, but it's that saying it's boring and saying, oh, he's a wet blanket and he's not doing anything is very different. And I feel like a lot of people criticize fighters for doing what they can in the moment, even if it's not the most exciting thing in the world. They'll undermine what the fighter's actually doing just to call them boring, which if your goal is to call them boring, just say they're boring. They don't have to be your favorite fighter ever. They don't have to be a big striker who knocks out everybody in one punch and denies all grappling and just keeps it standing. If that's your kind of fighter, cool. But don't call people boring simply for, well, you call people boring if you think they're boring, but don't undermine what they're actually doing just because you don't like what they're doing and you don't want to put in the research of what they're actually doing, or you just don't realize it in the moment. I think it's kind of scummy because, I've been in a MMA fight before. Shit sucks. It's rough. And looking at what they're doing and the amount of stress that they have to go through in these moments and the techniques and everything else that they're doing, it takes a lot. And even in a situation where it seems to be more of a stalemate, they are still doing a lot. And I feel undermining that is kind of just, rude to the fighters. Moving on. Yap session over here. But yeah, moving on. Shavkat Rakhmonov and Stephen Thompson. This went exactly the way I was expecting it to go. You take Wonder Boy, who is known for primarily doing stand-up and losing grappling exchanges a lot of the time, where he's known for losing the grappling exchanges and losing a lot of control time and getting hit while on the bottom. But he's known for surviving on the bottom more often. It was news to me he had never been tapped out on bottom. Well, tapped out in general in the UFC, apparently. I thought he must have been at some point. But I guess I was off. My bad. But Rakhmonov did it. He did it in the second round, because in the first round he could not take down Wonder Boy, if my memory's right. He was struggling a lot with Wonder Boy's takedown defense, which this does make you think, does Rakhmonov really have what it takes to fight somebody like Muhammad or Covington or Leon? Because people were talking about him like he was going to murder everybody. They were talking about him like he was going to kill everyone, and they held him in a very similar regard to where people held Chimaev before his fight with like Gilbert Burns, because he was going against these people and beating them super quick and finishing them. And I'd say he had a very similar situation to where Chimaev fought Burns and had a very close fight and ended up winning. And then Shavkat fought Neal and he had a very nice fight and ended up winning, but he did show some weaknesses in that fight, and some people were like, okay, well, his striking's not all the way there, and we've seen in his older fights he has been like dropped before and stuff, but he did survive and come back, which is important. But overall in the fight, we saw Shavkat take Wonder Boy down after some extended periods of Wonder Boy's defense and then end up getting a rear naked choke. That happens. Very good on him to be able to finally be the one to tap out Wonder Boy. Now, if you want to use Wonder Boy's age as an excuse, that is fair. He's like 40, and that's pretty old for fighting years. Moving on to Ferguson and Pimblett, another situation of a 40-year-old, very old, especially for the lightweight division, where basically the lower in weight you go, the more age and stuff has a factor typically, because the skill level and the explosiveness and everything and your durability and everything tends to mean more at the lower weight classes, because something like heavyweight, almost anyone can knock out anyone at heavyweight, and a lot of people do it with less technique than you normally see in the lower weight divisions. So age means something a lot more in those lower divisions. And we did see that with Ferguson. Now, I love Ferguson. He was one of my favorites a while back, and I still do. I wish he would do good, but he's not. Sorry, I've been talking for 20 minutes. Decided to take a sip of my drink. Ferguson in his 7 fight skid has shown that he is very quickly losing the explosiveness and everything that his old style was built around. And we saw that in the fight with Paddy, where most of the time, striking wise, he was losing the exchanges pretty badly. He was simply not fast enough to land anything substantial. The biggest things I saw him land against Paddy was like a big step, like a big lead front kick that the front kick misses, but because he steps so far into it and he throws his lead hand out just in front of him, he lands the jab from it. That was the most impactful thing I saw him land on Paddy. And Paddy's landing pretty good counters. He landed a very good knee. He dropped Ferguson, and then on the ground we saw Ferguson doing like rubber guard and going for triangles, and Paddy having a very fundamental counter to that, and Ferguson not having a counter to that and not going for something else. Because what would happen is Ferguson would try to isolate an arm, and then he would bring his leg up he would basically bring his leg up into the armpit of Paddy so that he can, his knee, yeah, that's it. He would bring his knee in between him and Paddy so that once he gets control of that same side hand, he can bring his leg over and go for the triangle. Paddy, in reaction to this, would step up that same leg, so now that foot is trapped in between like the armpit and leg, and it gives him a lot more control of that leg, and Ferguson no longer has the ability to kick around his arm, which stops the triangle in most cases. So we saw a lot of submission defense stuff from Paddy, but we also saw where most people assumed his limitations would be. Most people expected him to win fairly quickly, from what I remember saying. I thought it was going to be a decision just because, from what I've seen from Paddy, he is not the most big hitter type out of anyone. And Ferguson, even in his old age, is not getting like starched. He's not getting starched out other than Michael Chandler, he would do that to like everybody if he knew how to throw a straight punch. He's Michael Chandler is a big explosive guy for a good division filled with explosive dudes. He is one of the hardest hitters in that division, and even somebody like Tony in his old age is still tough despite having that knockout loss. Now, if you want to say his toughness has decreased very much, yeah, it has. But I did believe he was tough enough to last the entire fight with Paddy, and I was right. So, if you bet against me on that, I win. But overall, it was a nice one. I was really hoping Tony would just pull a triangle out of the bag of tricks and end up winning. But this is probably for the best. I hope he retires afterwards. You don't need to be doing this to yourself. You're an older guy. You should retire and spend time with your family and everything. You've done all you can in the sport. Anything now is just hurting your legacy and what you have done. People are going to be looking at him in a very similar light to where they look at BJ Penn. They go, he was very good in his prime, but then he stayed for way too long. And right now we're looking at it as, he's on a losing streak that's going to affect things like his legacy, and it's just sad to see him lose like this. But then later on in life, we also got to worry about brain stuff. He should not be taking all this damage anymore. I wish something like the UFC would pay him properly, but they don't do that. So I can only hope that he's invested his money well and has enough to retire comfortably after this. But of course it's Tony, so he probably won't, sadly. Moving on to, the barn burner, the absolute brawl that was Josh Emmett and Bryce Mitchell. Emmett lands one shot, and then he lands his second punch of the entire fight and turns a man standing nice and straight into a man standing parallel with the floor. Very classic Josh Emmett. This is what he's known for doing. I do not understand. Maybe it's part of being worried about it and you just want to get him to stop doing it as fast as possible. But trying to counter Josh Emmett's right overhand with a cross, we've seen like Michael Johnson do it, and now Bryce Mitchell. It is not the thing to go for. What I think people should be going to do if they go, okay, I'm fighting Josh Emmett, is do what Ilya did: fluster him with feints, land some good jabs, throw. This is something that Jack Slag goes on about, like Duran used to do. Throw a jab from a little bit out of range. His instinct will be to counter your jab. Let Emmett whiff his overhand and then counter him afterwards. You don't need to counter him whilst he's throwing the overhand, because even in some lucky situation where on the first overhand he swings where you don't have the timing down, y'all trade. It's Josh Emmett. He's like the hardest hitting guy in that entire division. He destroys people's faces. Mitchell, I hope he's okay, first off. Secondly, he might want to take a step down in competition, probably somewhere more around like the Dan Ige level. Fight somebody who he can kind of build up from, because this was very rough, and I'm just glad he's okay. There's not a lot of times you see someone get knocked out spark with one shot, get starched, and then seize on the ground a little bit afterwards. A lot of people were worried about him. Apparently he's fine. That's good. Take a long break. Figure out some tactical things that you might need to figure out and fix the problems that led to a situation like this. Of course, I'm not one to talk. I got beat up in my first one by a better striker, so, fair enough. I'm not going at this as someone who feels like they have all the knowledge in the world, but, I'm fairly good at analyzing things after it happened. Anyways, that was the entire main card and a little bit of the prelims. I'm going to try to cover the next one. Hey, if these do well, I might end up doing predictions on some of these, a little preview, so I can be wrong about my predictions and y'all can make fun of me. But yeah, overall, I'm going to try to do these so y'all have at least a little bit of me in the meantime while I'm spending over a year to make a blueprint. Outside of that, I've been Austin Sin. I hope y'all are having a good one. I will see y'all next time I do one of these. Goodbye.